On July 22, 1944, at 7:30 in the morning in Afua, New Guinea, Private Donald R. Lobaugh pressed himself down into the thick, sticky mud as the Japanese Type 99 machine gun hammered burst after burst across the withdrawal route. Each round slammed into the ground, kicking up dirt and rotten roots, pinning the entire American platoon to the earth. The night before, they had been ambushed, pushed back yard by yard, until they were trapped in front of the firepower holding the escape path. Lobaugh had been wounded since the previous evening. His left ankle was badly swollen, and a grazing bullet wound along his side made him double over every time he tried to take a deep breath. Even so, he crawled to the platoon leader's side. The commander, face smeared with mud, voice almost gone, forced out each word. "If we don't knock out that gun, we're all going to die here." In front of them lay a 30-yard open clearing, torn apart by bullets into blackened streaks. Raising your head even a few inches meant getting shot down. No one wanted to step into it, but if no one did, the whole platoon would be wiped out. Lobaugh looked at the clearing, looked at his comrades, and knew he didn't have many options. He wiped the mud from his hands, gripped his rifle tightly, shifted his weight onto his good leg, and stood up. No waiting for orders. He charged straight toward the Japanese position, his body screaming in pain, bullets whipping past on both sides, but he kept running. His only goal: get close, throw grenades, neutralize the Type 99 before it could tear apart the men behind him. And when Lobaugh burst from the brush and launched himself across the open ground, everyone understood that 19-year-old soldier had just chosen to become the only barrier between life and death for the platoon. Lobaugh was born in 1925 in Freeport, Pennsylvania, a small town along the Allegheny River. His father was a laborer, his mother worked odd jobs, and the kids grew up surrounded by the smell of machine oil, wet wood, and dinners that were always short on food. When the Great Depression swept through, Freeport sank faster than most places. Factories closed, wages dropped, adults lost jobs. For most, dreams were just stories told during breaks. For some others, including Lobaugh, dreams turned into restlessness. He couldn't sit still, always running out into the streets, always testing every limit he encountered. Many in town liked him for his straightforward nature, but many others shook their heads in disapproval. He was quick to anger, quick to fight, never thinking more than 3 seconds before acting. In the local police logbook, the name Don appeared more often than any other teenager his age. At 16, everything spiraled out of control. A petty theft, a few small items from a little shop, one impulsive minute was enough to send him to a place no kid wants to go: reform school. For many, that was the end. For Lobaugh, it was the first real blow that forced him to look at himself. There it was only discipline, schedules, duties, and the cold of mornings when you had to get up earlier than the whistle. He was made to learn responsibility. Every mistake had a punishment. Every lie got exposed. Every passing day put the question in front of him: what kind of man did he want to become? Time in reform school didn't make him softer, but it made him tougher, sharper. And for the first time he learned to stay quiet and finish a job properly. When he returned to Freeport, he wanted one thing: to do right, to prove he wasn't just the town troublemaker. In 1941, America entered the war. The enlistment lists posted outside the town hall grew longer each week. Soldiers coming home on leave brought medals, stories, and the look of men who had seen a world bigger than the town. Everyone knew every corner of. In Lobaugh's eyes, it wasn't glamour, it was opportunity, a real door. In his life, this was the first time he could start over without the past dragging him down. Late in 1942, he stood in front of the recruiting office in Pittsburgh, clutching his papers, feet tapping lightly on the floor to stay calm. He looked at the wooden door, the one that would decide everything ahead. Infantry training in 1942, 1943, wasn't what Lobaugh imagined when he signed his enlistment papers. There were no thrilling moments, only orders, sweat, and physical tests designed to push recruits to their absolute limit. Every day meant long marches, heavy packs, little water, endless dirt roads, Drill instructors shouted until their voices cracked, while hundreds of feet kept stepping with no questions allowed. At night, they dug foxholes, built emplacements, set up temporary wire. During the day, they learned ambush defense, scatter fast, use terrain counterattack in the first few seconds before being overrun. New soldiers didn't have time to think. They just followed the whistle and the shouts of superiors. Then came live fire drills. No distant mock simulations. Real bullets snapped overhead. Dirt exploded right in front of your face. The goal was to make every man used to gunfire coming from multiple directions at once. Used to the feeling of sound pounding your ears until your palms shook. Soldiers also had to learn movement in simulated jungle. Wooden frames packed tight, hanging ropes to snag narrow paths. Simulated artillery blasts, simulated screams. The whole system existed for one reason. The Pacific wasn't like any other American battlefield. By mid-1943, the 32nd Red Arrow Division shipped out to New Guinea. When the ship docked, everyone understood training had only been the beginning. Real war stood right ahead. The first step onto New Guinea proved it. The air was thick. The heat was like a furnace. Sweat poured even when standing still. Mosquitoes attacked in swarms. Malaria took men from platoons in just weeks. Soldiers hadn't even seen Japanese troops yet, and were already fighting weather and disease. The terrain was brutal. That was what shocked American troops. In New Guinea, the enemy didn't step out to face you. They waited, watched. They struck when Americans were most careless. A shot from an unexpected direction. Snipers in trees. Small groups rushing down slopes. A Japanese unit could pin down a whole company just by patiently firing short bursts, then disappearing. They fought in ways that left American soldiers disoriented. No one saw them until it was too late. Lobaugh went through his first firefight, barely understanding what was happening. The unit had just moved through a steep section when gunfire erupted from the flank. A man ahead dropped. The soldier next to Lobaugh collapsed to the right without a sound. No one knew the direction. They just knew to get low, watch, then fire back on instinct. Everything happened fast and brutal. In the jungle, war was every yard of ground fought for with reflexes. Lobaugh didn't panic. He did exactly what he'd been taught. Hug the ground, control breathing, stay close to the leader. He watched his comrades move inch by inch, and understood survival lay in not making mistakes in the smallest actions. After several engagements, his grip on the rifle grew steadier. He learned to read faint boot prints on the ground, to spot enemy movement from just a compressed patch of earth. He learned to snap off shots, then shift position the instant the rifle fired. Each week, a few names were crossed off the roster. A few faces vanished quietly. And amid that harshness, something changed in him. He no longer thought he was asking for a chance to fix his life. He understood he was keeping the men next to him alive. And that very responsibility created the man who would charge a Japanese machine gun a year later, at Afua. On the night of July 21, 1944, Lobaugh's platoon was moving through dense jungle near Afua, when they were ambushed. A single vicious burst from the left flank dropped 3 men instantly. The night jungle closed in on all sides, so thick that every step backward felt like running into a pitch-black room with no door. They tried pulling the wounded back, but the trail was too narrow, the terrain too chaotic, and the bullets kept pouring down in steady death knell rhythm. When the firing paused briefly, they checked heavy casualties. 3 dead on the spot. Several shot in arms, legs, unable to move. Drinking water was nearly gone. Compressed rations barely enough for 1 meal. They'd been fighting continuously for days. No resupply. And the night jungle made every pain feel twice as bad. The air was so humid, breath stuck in your throat, making the wounded groan. Mosquitoes swarmed wounds. Leeches clung thick around ankles. Mud so deep that every time they dragged someone, boots sank deeper. When they finally found a temporary position, everyone was near exhaustion. They all knew what was happening. The Japanese were closing the noose. From the west came the clink of metal. Maybe a small Japanese unit changing magazines. From the north, scattered footsteps. From the east, a flare shot up, then died. All of it signaled one thing: they were about to be surrounded. The unit still had enough ammo to fight, but lacked everything else: water, medicine, information, and any escape route. They were being ground down hour by hour. The platoon leader had been wounded in the shoulder from the first ambush. He leaned back against a damp tree trunk, forcing his voice loud enough for the group to hear. His breathing was ragged, but the words were clear. "Tomorrow morning, if we're still here, we won't have a chance." Those words fell like a blade cutting the last thin thread of hope. Lobaugh looked around. The faint light from a lingering flare lit the faces of soldiers younger than him, 18, 19, some just weeks in the unit. In one very quick moment, he realized what no one said out loud: someone had to stand up. In New Guinea, Lobaugh had no personal grudge against the Japanese. He only had duty. He looked at the wounded, men who would die right there if no one opened a path. He looked at the platoon leader struggling to stay conscious so the men's spirit wouldn't break. He looked at the pitch-black jungle ahead, the direction they had to cross to live, and he understood the hardest part had to be carried by someone. No one appointed him, but in Lobaugh's mind, the choice had appeared the moment the platoon leader spoke. Tomorrow morning, if no one broke the encirclement, the whole group would be wiped out. And if someone had to open the way, it would be him. No other reason needed. Before dawn on July 22nd, while the jungle was still thick with mist, Lobaugh was up. He checked his rifle first, wiped the barrel quickly, tightened the sling, inserted a fresh magazine. Then he moved along the line of men lying in the dark, dividing the last bits of dry rations in his pockets. A piece of cracker, a little sugar, a few shakes of water from the bottom of his canteen. Not enough to save anyone, but enough to remind everyone they still had each other. Before the group prepared to move, Lobaugh went to the platoon leader and said, "Let me take point." The words got immediate reactions. "No way. You're wounded. You can't run like that. Let me." A few others started to stand, but Lobaugh waved them off. He looked at each one. "It's not because I'm the best. It's because there's no one waiting for me at home." No one answered. A second of silence spread through the group. Many had families waiting for them to come back. Some had young kids, some were engaged, some sent letters home every week. But Lobaugh, the guy once called Freeport's trouble, had no one waiting at the front door. He was the one who could take the risk without breaking anyone else's heart along with his. But that was only part of the truth. The rest was in his eyes that morning. He wasn't doing it for himself. He was doing it for the men, shaking with malaria, for the men clutching spare ammo to their chests, for the men who could live if someone had the courage to step forward. Lobaugh had once been the reckless teenager, fighting in streets, treating every rule like a challenge to break. But the jungle had ground him into something else: friends' deaths, sudden ambushes, sleepless nights from strange footsteps, days marching on empty stomachs. All of it piled up into something he'd never had before: responsibility. The platoon leader placed a hand on his shoulder. A light squeeze instead of words of acceptance. The choice was clear. The jungle path ahead was quiet but full of danger. Whoever stepped first would be the first to meet the bullets. And Lobaugh knew that he was ready for what waited. No trace left of the noisy kid from before. Only a soldier who knew exactly what he had to do, and accepted the price. When the first light of morning touched the leaves, the platoon began crawling to their assault position. Ahead was the 30-yard clearing, a patch of ground shredded by bullets since the night before. The earth was pockmarked with small craters. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air. It wasn't an escape route. It was a killing field, where poking your head up meant getting nailed by the next burst. But it was the only way. Lobaugh felt the pain shooting from his left ankle up to his side. The wound felt like barbed wire caught inside him, but he still planted his hands in the mud, crawled out from under the tree shadow. The first steps were the wet squelch of mud under his elbows. Then the Type 99 machine gun roared. The first burst tore into the ground inches from Lobaugh's face, throwing mud onto his cheeks. He pressed himself lower and kept crawling. One bullet grazed his left shoulder, then another swept across his thigh. Sharp pain. Vision blurred. But he didn't stop. He dragged himself forward yard by yard, hand by hand, breath bursting out in short gasps. Behind him the platoon saw only his shirt disappear, then rise again, as if he were fighting his own body weight. When he reached the halfway point, there was no more cover. If he kept crawling, he'd be shot down immediately. Lobaugh knew that. He clenched his teeth, shifted power to his right leg, and sprang to his feet. That was the moment the whole platoon thought he'd be cut down instantly. Japanese bullets ripped the air. Streams of rounds whipped past both sides of him, like razor winds brushing his skin. Dirt exploded upward in sprays under his feet. Rock fragments stung his face, making his eyes burn. But Lobaugh kept running. Step by step, his left ankle hurt so much that every footfall felt like a hammer blow. But he charged on. He clutched the rifle tight to his chest, hunched low, poured all his weight into momentum, so he wouldn't stop in the middle. One bullet slammed into his right leg, buckling his knee, nearly dropping him. He caught himself on one hand, pushed up, kept running. Then he pulled the pin on his first grenade. His arm screamed in pain, but he threw it with the momentum of his run. The grenade arced low and landed right in the machine gun embrasure. A dry, powerful boom shook the ground underfoot. Mud, rotten leaves, and screams burst from the bunker. The Type 99 went silent for half a second. Half a second enough for Lobaugh to take 3 more steps. But the Japanese gunners on both sides were still there. 2 more sweeping bursts. One round punched into his left chest, making him stagger a step. Another tore through his side, cutting his breath short. He raised his rifle, fired back at 2 dark shapes that had just appeared from the bunker's flank. His shots were sharp, short, accurate. 2 Japanese soldiers dropped before they could fire again. He knew he didn't have much time left, but only a few feet remained. He lunged forward, threw his second grenade toward the reserve gun being readied. The grenade exploded, ripping apart the rest of the bunker entrance. Lobaugh slid on his momentum, collapsing right beside the Japanese bunker mouth, just steps away. His hand still gripped the rifle tightly. The platoon behind didn't see exactly when he was hit. They only saw the exact moment the Type 99 went completely silent, and black smoke from the grenades rose from the freshly torn ground. Then they heard a shout. "Let's go!" The whole platoon sprang up. Men who had been huddled in the brush stood, taking advantage of the gap just opened. They fired back at both flanks, poured force into the exact point in the line Lobaugh had broken. The remaining Japanese in the bunker hadn't even recovered when they were hit from 2 directions. The platoon surged across the clearing they had thought would kill them minutes earlier. They passed the gun pit, passed the spot where Lobaugh had fallen, and seized the high ground just beyond. The entire fight lasted about 60 seconds. 60 seconds that turned the platoon from despair to survival. 60 seconds that turned a teenager once sent to reform school into the man who saved 30 lives. For those present at Afua that morning, the last image they remembered of WWII Lobaugh wasn't a wounded young soldier. They remembered him in that final moment, rising in the killing field, charging straight into the Japanese machine gun, and opening a path no one else dared take. When the fight was over, the men still standing moved toward each other in exhaustion. They called names. Some answered right away. Some names were never heard again. One man counted weapons. Another checked remaining ammo. But everyone knew the most important thing wasn't in the numbers. The important thing was they still had enough strength to leave this jungle. And the reason they were alive was lying just a few yards away. At the mouth of the Japanese bunker, Lobaugh's body lay on its side, one hand still holding the rifle, the other stretched forward as if he were still trying to crawl one last step. His face was covered with a thin layer of dirt, his shirt torn open at the side where the bullet passed through. But something about that posture, solid, decisive, made the young soldiers unable to look away. They knelt beside him. One man took his remaining canteen, poured a few drops of water onto his forehead. Another gently touched his shoulder and had to turn away because he couldn't hold it together. They had seen many deaths in the jungle, but this was a death everyone understood they owed. They lifted Lobaugh up. He wasn't heavy. His thin body was easily placed on a poncho used as a stretcher, but every step they took slowed as if afraid to hurt the man who had just saved them. The younger soldiers, the ones who had trembled in the dark the night before, now sat beside him, heads bowed to their knees. They didn't hide their feelings. An 18-year-old soldier said through tears, "He did something I never even thought of daring." Another clenched his fist. He didn't deserve to die like this. He was too young. But everyone knew if Lobaugh hadn't charged, many of them wouldn't be alive to say a word. They carried him out of the killing field, through the now silent jungle, past fallen trees, wading through the thick mud pools they had just run through in chaos minutes earlier. The path he opened still smelled of gunpowder and deep footprints. The unit moved to a safer rally point, where the company and battalion were trying to regroup, after days of continuous fighting. When they appeared, carrying a poncho-covered stretcher, other groups of soldiers stopped immediately. No one needed to ask what happened. Just seeing the slow way they walked was enough. The news spread fast, first through the company, then the battalion. A young soldier, only 19, once sent to reform school, had opened a death path to save the whole platoon. Those who heard it first went silent. A veteran sergeant said just one thing: "My God, that kid did something even our veteran platoon might not have dared." At battalion headquarters, when the official report was written, the duty officer paused his pen for a long time, not because he doubted, but because he had to ask himself if it could really happen. One man, wounded, charging straight into a Japanese machine gun, breaking the defense line in 60 seconds, and saving the entire unit. But all witnesses said the same. No one told it differently, not even one detail. And then when his body was brought to the temporary rear area, the entire platoon stood around, exhausted, caked in mud, uniforms torn, but in absolute silence. In that moment, they weren't just survivors. They were men seeing off the one who had given them the chance to live. When the jungle fell quiet again, that silence no longer carried threat. It was like the jungle itself acknowledging that there are moments, brutal enough to tear people apart, that still leave something that makes men bow in respect. For that platoon, what remained now was the truth. They had walked out of the jungle because of one man's action, and that man's name was Donald R. Lobaugh. When Lobaugh's body was moved to the rear, and the casualty list from the Afua fight was sent up the chain, the story of the 30-yard charge began spreading beyond the platoon. It went through the company, the battalion, then to regimental headquarters. People retold it with the same tone, not sensationalism, but disbelief mixed with awe. A wounded young soldier had stood up and charged straight into a Japanese machine gun, opening a path for nearly 40 men to escape death. Reports sent to the War Department were written in dry, standard language, but even within those cold lines, the truth stood out. Private Lobaugh advanced alone, disregarding his own wounds, neutralized the position, enabling his platoon to withdraw. In April 1945, the United States War Department officially announced that Lobaugh was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation read, "With complete disregard for his own safety, he charged forward under heavy enemy fire, destroyed the machine gun position, and saved the lives of the men of his platoon." His fearless action exemplifies the highest traditions of military service. The award ceremony was held with more silence than words. His family was present. A representing officer read the battle account again. His mother, the woman who brought him into the world, stood quietly as the medal was placed in her hands. She didn't hear the end of the ceremony. She only heard the two sentences she would remember for the rest of her life. He saved the platoon. The Lobaugh family wasn't rich. No one had ambition or political connections. They were just small-town people living by hard work. But that day, they stood among the formal rows as if their son had just joined the ranks of those who created the most glorious chapters in American military history, not through great victories, but through standing up when no one else dared. Lobaugh's body was buried at Reimersburg Cemetery, Pennsylvania. A small grave, a simple stone marker, engraved with his name, birth date, death date, and the words Medal of Honor. The townspeople who once shook their heads at every mention of young Don's troubles now paused whenever they passed by, to lay down a flower, or just to stand quietly for a few seconds. Over the years, that grave became a stopping place for old veterans, for school children brought by teachers on local history trips, for fathers bringing sons to tell them that sometimes an ordinary person can do something extraordinary. Many years later, a new bridge was built across the Allegheny River in Pennsylvania. When it came time to name it, there was no debate. They called it the Donald R. Lobaugh Bridge. Every day thousands of cars drive across, and though most drivers don't know the story behind the name, there are still people from Freeport who drive by and quietly look at the sign, as if reminding themselves of a young face, short-cropped hair, bright eyes, and a life stopped just as it reached manhood. In the military, Lobaugh's story became an unofficial reminder of the true nature of courage. Not speeches or gold-framed photos in halls, but crazy brief moments where one person has to choose in a split second between life and death, between self and comrades. Veterans retold the story in barracks, in old bars, in rare reunions. They didn't tell it with pride. They told it in low, steady voices, and the end usually had just one comment: that kid. He did something even we might not have dared. For the people of his hometown, Lobaugh wasn't a legend, he was part of collective memory. A 19-year-old boy once seen as hard to teach, once lost, once sent to reform school. But when the decisive moment came, he chose right. And that choice echoed farther than his short life. Today, whenever his name is mentioned, many still say the old line, "He saved the platoon." There is astonishment in it. There is admiration. And there is sorrow in knowing that the price to save the platoon was a young man whose future had only just begun to open. To close the story of Donald R. Lobaugh, there's hardly a better way than what veterans often repeat: war doesn't give them power or glory. It only gives moments where if they don't stand up, others will fall. And they stood up. If you want to hear more war stories told with full truth and raw emotion, please hit subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you for joining. See you in the next journey.